Okay, this is an exemplar that I've developed for a research claim, and it's based on spinal muscular atrophy, which is where children end up having muscles that basically atrophy, which means they become useless pieces of tissue that cannot actually move because the nerves that are supposed to be stimulating them don't work. So this couple here has a high chance of actually having a child with SMA type 1, which is a nasty one, in which the child actually dies, usually before the age of 5. And the cost of treatment for this child is actually quite high if they do have one, and the quality of life that child would have with the current medical research that I've actually put in as a student here, the quality of life is actually quite low. So I've actually made the claim that at this point I cannot allow them or give a recommendation that they can have a child naturally at this point in time, that further genetic testing would have to happen in order to make sure that they won't be having a child with SMA type 1, not only because of the cost of Medicare, but also because of the possible low quality of life that child would suffer. So that's the recommendation I've put in here. And now I've gone on to explain a little bit about SMA and what it actually does, the fact that it affects the motor neurons of the child, starting from the spinal cord, that it usually results in death before adulthood, that there are different versions, but basically if you inherit a faulty gene, one of these genes here, that the result of that is that the SMN1 or 2 gene, it produces a protein, okay, and the problem is that with this mutation, this protein that's essential for the survival of their motor neurons is not produced properly. So the motor neurons, that's the neurons that actually service the nerves, die because they don't have enough of this protein. They have a reduced level of this protein. It means that as the child grows, their motor neurons are not given enough protein to survive. Without any signals from those motor neurons, their muscles start to atrophy and waste away. Eventually, the child actually has severe respiratory difficulties because the muscle servicing the respiratory tract and that, and also the muscles servicing like their face and their stomach and that, they actually atrophy as well, which means that they can't move, they can't breathe, they can't feed. The cost of this is actually quite high, as you can understand. I've got here that there are severe physical and social emotional effects suffered both by the child and the family. The child, now this is important, while sound in mind, suffers degeneration of the muscle tissue, so they know what's happening, but they can't do anything. It gets to a point where they cannot move, and they are unable to breathe properly or without help. The family needs to supply 24-hour care for this child, and there is significant ongoing costs for this child. Okay, so now I've gone on to draw up the pedigree for this. Now it says here the family in question provided this information due to the recessive, so I've talked about it, the recessive nature of SMN. A parent can carry the disease without showing the symptoms. After analysing the family pedigree, it can be deduced that one parent is definitely a carrier. However, now this is where an A-level point would come in here. Research estimates that 1 in 40 Australians are actually a carrier of SMN as well, and without realising it. So there's a 1 in 40 chance that the other parent could also be a carrier of SMN, because it's actually quite prevalent in our population. So if that's the case, then the other parent could be a carrier, 1 in 40 chance, and if the other parent is a carrier as well, then they definitely have a chance of having a child with SMN. Because of that, I've developed several possible pedigrees, Punnett squares. Now first of all, look at my pedigree here. I've actually gone in here and talked about the parent that has the family tree with SMN in it, and I've put down the possible phenotypes of all of these people in the pedigree. I've also put in here that the other parent that doesn't have a history of it, they actually have a 1 in 40 chance of having SMN anyway. So if that's the case, then there's a 1 in 40 chance that they are a silent carrier with a big N, little n. So I've put that in there. So my pedigree now states that I have several different possibilities. Either both my parents don't have it, one of my parents has it and the other one of my parents is a carrier and the other one isn't, or both my parents are carriers, which means I have to have 3 pedigrees if I want to get an A level on this. Here's my possibilities. Possibility 1, neither parent carries it. Possibility 2, one of them carries it. Possibility 3, both of them carry it. Now, in the case of neither parent carrying it, remember there is a 50-50 chance that one of the parents is a carrier. So there's a 50% chance at least that this will happen here. 50% chance that one of the parents carries it. So to sum up the possibilities, 50% chance is that this is our scenario. That means we could have had just a 50% chance that there'll be no problem, but remember, there is a 1 in 40 chance that this will be my scenario, that both parents are carriers, okay? So if that's the case here, there is a 1 in 40 chance at least that they will both be carriers and that 1/4 of their children will then have the disease, and 50% chance of their children will actually carry the disease. So there is a decent chance there that their child will have a disease, and you need some more information is what I'm arguing. Whether or not you would argue the same with those probabilities is up to you. Depends on how you argue it. Now I'm going to argue that here, and by doing that I'm going to show you the information that I've come up with about if this worst case scenario comes out, this is what's going to play out. First of all, the impact on the child. Now notice I've got some inconsistent referencing here. Sometimes I'm referencing with numbers for footnoting, and sometimes I'm referencing with names and stuff. So that's going to go against me, but let's just look at the information. I'm talking about what actually happens to that child, how they're never able to sit up. I've talked about how they have congenital weaknesses, what type of things happen to them, how their facial muscles and that can't develop. They have respiratory problems, the fact that it doesn't affect their cognitive abilities, but this means that they understand what's happening, but they can't live a normal life. I've also talked about here the social problems that this person would have, the fact that they can't easily communicate even though they have full cognitive abilities. I've also talked about the impact on their family, again, what actually happens with their family, the financial cost as well as the emotional cost. They can't easily interact or embrace or communicate with their child. They have to watch their child slowly deteriorate. They have a financial issue there because they all have multiple surgeries. There's medical equipment and machinery the child needs to help move, to help breathe. There's a large cost to the government as well if you have Medicare. One partner is unable to work because of this. They need to care for the child full time, which means that limited the family income as well. And it's very hard if you have siblings that you're needing to support as well. And then I've got here impact to society. Now I've talked here and gone and got some information off government websites on this. The cost to the taxpayer in this case, where is it here? They will have very high medical expenses. There's where I got this information from. This medical expenditure on children who don't have SMN, like normal kids without similar genetic diseases, normally it will cost us only about $4,300 per child before the age of 4, I think. For a child with SMN, the average cost is $83,600 before the age of 4. Now, I've actually done some extrapolating there, which means that'll actually improve my marks. I've extrapolated, I've taken that information, and I've actually made it my own by doing my own calculations using that. So this actually gets me extra marks. If we have 310,000 births per year, I've taken that from the government census, and 1 in 6,000 births is a child who has a version of SMA, okay, then that means that we have 51 extra children every year who have SMA, and each of them have that cost for the first 4 years of their life, which means that you'd be paying out $4.2 million just for people who have SMA or SMN, and they've known that they could have actually had it. In this case, they could have avoided it by not going ahead and having a child without further genetic testing. It's a very large cost to the government each year, and that money could actually go to other people in the healthcare system. Recent improvements in technology, now this is me really playing devil's advocate because it's a hard point to put forward, but recent improvements mean that these children actually have a longer lifespan, which means it costs us even more. And with the fact that we actually have an aging population, eventually this is going to be quite unsustainable for our healthcare system. Now, there are some drugs to alleviate the symptoms of this. Unfortunately, it costs this much per year per child. So again, I've given the reference there of where I found this information. So I've covered individual, family and society with data that I've pulled out, and I've actually gone and extrapolated that data further to really back my point. Now, in conclusion, I actually haven't written a conclusion here, but the conclusion would basically sum up this to say that they should not actually go ahead and have children if there's a high chance that they might have that SMA. But I haven't said they can't have children. I've said they need further genetic testing to decide, to find out whether or not either of them is a carrier. Because if either of them is a carrier, then that could result in a high health cost to our system, either if it's this first genetic, if it's this last probability here, then they'll definitely have a high health cost right now. Or even if one of them's a carrier, then that means they're going to have kids who are also carriers, which means that this problem would perpetuate and go further down the system for the next generation. So I've said they need to actually have genetic testing before they go ahead. Now, that's what I mean when I say in here, have tables, graphs, charts, diagrams, photographs. I could have added a few more in there, but what I did add in there for the extra points was mathematical calculations that I've done to try and back myself up. I should actually maybe in a after my reference list show how I came by these calculations to really prove where I got that data from. It's important that you show how you came up with those figures. Now lastly in here we've got the reference list. This is not completed by the students, so that's definitely going to be dropping them a little bit as well. But the one thing I wanted to point out here, and I haven't added in yet, is an evaluation of the resources or a discussion of whether or not you've got some valid and reliable data there. To really try and improve your marks, you can actually discuss whether this data here comes from reliable sources, why you think so. So in this case, this is actually from a medical journal here. I have information from the Australian government, from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I have a news report from Sydney Morning Herald, which was actually on a case study of an actual baby who was being treated for this disease. Both parents were carriers, but neither knew that they were carriers. So it's actually quite a vivid story that shows what can actually happen and what quality of life a family has when this disease pops out unexpectedly. So there are some valid sources there, definitely, especially with the government statistics. What I need to talk about here is whether they're valid or not, whether I need some more information from other sources to really back myself up, and where we go from here when it comes to improving the way I've actually conducted myself in this research essay, and how I can actually improve the way I collect data in the future. That sort of evaluation of your sources and your method is what I need to help give you marks on your evaluation section. So although it's quite quickly done, I really hope that this example essay will help you improve the quality of what you've written, improve the way you justify your points, and most definitely make you think about, okay, what data can I take and then extrapolate or make my own in order to improve my marks, to really tell a story about whether or not we should go ahead and approve this this conception, or whether these people need to actually have more testing done before they even try to have a child. as long as you take data and actually make it your own and go further with it, that's what you need to do if you want to get the B and A level marks, and that's what someone does if they're really wanting to prove a point. So go ahead and see what you can do.